I want to say first and foremost, this person is completely fair to have criticisms of Helldivers 2 or any other game. Please don't go rabbiting in our comment sections. I know I only have 40 subscribers, but still I need to make that a point. Most of their points in this video can be waved off with it's a horde shooter. However, that argument is in bad faith in my opinion, because they made an almost 17-minute video detailing their experiences and their advice on the topic. So, I want to give the same amount of effort to my opinion on this.
This is the armor you need. Bring a lot of very stealthy, high explosive stratagems, avoid extermination missions, and prep for launch.
I can't figure out if this is a joke or an actual criticism or a bit of both, so take my comment with a grain of salt, but this game isn't built for stealth, so of course there aren't going to be many stealth armors or many options in that section. Also, stratagems aren't meant to sneak around with. You're supposed to have support weapons that are big and loud, and they're supposed to bring down bigger enemies as the dev states with their balance changes. But yes, extermination missions are stupid. They're just a worse version of search and destroy, and I don't even know why they're in the game, really.
I have scoured a lot of videos and content to try to piece together how this game's stealth and detection works, and have come to an incredibly aggravating conclusion. The Helldivers community doesn't know what stats are. Every question you could possibly ask is answered with "I think" and "in my experience" answers, which are all conflicting hearsay and conjecture, and so are useless. Trying to work out how enemy detection and detection propagation works, or if the latter even exists, has been a nightmarish hell, and it doesn't help when the game is actively breaking around me all the time. I experience so many bugs while playing this game that if I were to include them all, this video would bloat 10 minutes, so there'll be a bug compilation released separate from this video. Here is my current working theory for how enemy detection works at the time of writing. All enemies seem to have their detection of the player tracked separately before they enter active combat. There is no grouping of units together where their knowledge and detection is chained, even for patrols, though it can seem like this because enemies seeing their allies in combat gets them active as well. This is unlike, say, Metal Gear Solid 5, where all outposts and by extension active and alert enemies work on hive minds that all share information.
The Metal Gear Solid comparison is not very fair in my opinion, because that game almost completely focuses on tactical espionage action, and Helldivers is a horde shooter with stealth mechanics worked in basically just by accident. As the Arrowhead CEO states in an interview with Operator Drewski, it's not really that we have stealth gameplay, it's that everything just has to make sense. Although, the fact that they have zero hive mind is kinda stupid if you don't look at the fact that they're dumb robots and are functioning like dumb robots. Whether you think that is a good gameplay addition with the lore, that's up for grabs, but that's my opinion.
To explain why I think this, see here. Sometimes, even in the midst of combat, you'll find a bot that's remained somehow unalerted and tries to detect you before firing, even when its comrades are actively in combat near them. I know patrols don't have chain detection either because I have this example where I managed to get the attention of only half of a patrol. And because this game can't go a single mission without a bug, after they check out the sound and conclude there's nothing there, they're pathing to get back to their patrol, bugs, and they just evaporate.
Yes, bugs in this game are rampant, and they are very stupid. I can't argue with you on that point, and they're going to bring this up a lot more, and I'm going to agree with them every single time.
I believe enemies have 4 possible states, the first being unalerted, like you'll see with wandering patrols and garrisoning forces. They either stick to their predetermined route or stand still, and they have to detect the player. Then they could be searching, which happens upon hearing sound. They walk towards where the sound came from, and upon making visual contact with a player, will have to detect them still. The third state I'll refer to as active, and I'm almost certain the trigger for this is seeing an ally in combat. It's very similar to their searching state, the only difference is that they don't have to go through the detection animation and go into combat immediately upon seeing a player. They can be in this active state extremely briefly, like half a second briefly in a lot of cases. Here's an example. They hear a sound, go into searching and turn around, see their friend in combat to go active, and then see me right after and go into combat.
I'm not going to fight on anything they say about this system generally, because they admitted it might be wrong, and they admitted it's just by personal experience. To me, it's unfair to yell at them or criticize them on things they already admitted they might be wrong about.
I think it's this complicated because there are some edge cases that would be completely inexplicable if the system was simpler, like those bots trying to detect people when they really shouldn't need to. If, after an enemy finishes searching in either their normal searching or active states, and they don't find anything, they either go back to their post or, more often, bug the absolute fuck out. I've seen enemies start doing the can in frustration, I've seen enemies run in circles and stop responding to sound even in the middle of war zones. Melee enemies in particular seem very prone to mental breakdowns, and in general seem to operate on different rules which can fuck you over. These double-bladed melee dudes seem to detect players instantaneously, and in this clip I just grazed his detection range, he spots me, and his friends notice him in combat, and immediately start firing on me too. This game is held together with the same magic that Bungie used to get Halo 2 out of the door.
Yes, this clip would show you how a stealth game is flawed, but Helldivers 2 isn't a stealth game. The fact that melee builds instantly spot you is kinda dumb, but it furthers the function of basically bum rushing you and you having very little time to react. But yes, their friends instantly spotting you as well is BS.
The last, fourth state is just active combat mode, where enemies can attack you freely and will advance towards you or where they think you are. As far as I can tell, enemies have three ways of entering this state. The first is the most obvious to notice from our perspective, a player shooting in their direction. I'm not sure how strict this is, it most likely checks if there are any enemies within X angles of where you're aiming when you fire and activates them, but I'm not sure. This is not based off sound, because bots cannot go into combat mode off sound alone, as previous examples with inexplicable unalerted bots show. That, and you can shoot much closer to bots without alerting them, as long as you're not aiming at them. I also have this clip of me taking out a set of enemies, and a guy in the next country away just happened to be within my sight picture, and so immediately called for reinforcements. The second trigger for enemies to go into combat is incredibly inconsistent, but having an offensive stratagem be deployed near them seems to be a trigger for combat, and may be responsible for the endless enemy range bug, which I'll talk about later.
I think it makes sense if it's not a bug, because big red blinking baseballs that only Helldivers can throw shows a general location of where you are and is very easy to spot.
The third is obvious, which is getting close enough to be detected. When this happens, I suspect it might put bots within a radius into combat mode as well, but what I think is much more likely is the following. I'm 99% sure that a very significant trigger for bots is seeing one of their comrades attacking a player. It's what I believe makes them either become active or just straight up be put into combat. This only triggers if they see their comrade's body, not their weapon's fire. Note that this is only within a bot's standard visual range of around 65 meters, and its usual insanely narrow detection cone still applies, which is why you can sometimes come across patrols getting shot at who don't care at all, and will sometimes see bots try to detect you when their friends 90 degrees away are shooting directly at you. Here is what I suspect is different between whether it makes the bot go straight up into combat or just active. When they see a friend lighting you up, they probably make a line of sight check to see if they have an unobstructed view of you. If yes, go into combat, and if no, go searching for your last known location, which is most likely where you last fired at an enemy. In this clip, I get shot at, and someone I can't see calls in a dropship. That heavily implies enemies can get made active by sound alone, but this is not true. That guy got activated by seeing his buddy shoot me, and I have many examples of bots being able to call in dropships when just being active and not in combat. Bots need a visual combat with either a player or another bot attacking a player to go into combat mode. This is honestly most likely why the game doesn't have suppressed weapons.
Or there aren't any suppressed weapons because stealth is a byproduct of the game's systems. Yes, the stealth system may be flawed, but you're making this critique under the false pretense that there is an intended stealth system. And the fact that robots don't have ears. Like, look at the models. They don't have ears. I know this argument is kind of silly, but seriously, look at them. And, if you might say that's just a theory crafting is a huge part of this game, and its lore.
It'd make people realize that all weapons are kind of effectively suppressed anyway, and reveal how irrelevant sound is to the stealth system. Seriously, the sound produced by small and large arms fire is ridiculously low. I'm not sure the exact range, and suspect it probably changes based on weapon, but it's much, much closer than you think it is, and I always operate assuming it's around 40 meters or so. As you can see in this clip, all airstrikes are effectively completely silent, as patrols don't care about them at all, and won't ever get drawn to them. They don't get drawn to objectives either, it's just that some objective phases spawn a fresh patrol out of thin air to ruin your day, but after they're dealt with, no one else cares.
I believe patrols not coming is a very good implementation, because if all patrols were to spot you and come near you, it would just start a chain reaction of people in bases seeing you, and you just basically having to fight off literally the entire map, which I believe wouldn't be very fun. And I believe it's implied that yes, they do hear you, and those patrols aren't just spawned in.
What is confusing about this is that the direction that you aim is way more important than anything else, which can certainly make it feel like sound propagates incredibly far. Sound really is an irrelevant mechanic, as evidenced by how you can't bait enemies with grenades, because once the explosion goes off, it seems to count as an attack, which updates your last known position, and so they know exactly where you are rather than investigating the grenade. Okay, now time to see if you can bait people with grenades. Didn't react to it.
But yes, if detection works off sound, it does not work very well. They do like a 30-second recap, I'm just skipping that.
Here's a rough, in general flowchart of what enemies do when they're in combat. When in combat, enemies see if there are any players within their visual range, which are the same ranges used for stealth detection, and shoot them. If there are, I suspect they can shoot at you accurately until you break line of sight. If they don't see anyone, they advance on their last known location, sometimes while blind firing at it. Players' last known location markers are updated when players fire their weapons at enemies, even when that range is way outside the weapon's sound range or the bot's visual range. This is why people assume they can be seen from much longer ranges than they actually can be. Enemies just love firing at nothing. The other reason is that there is an associated bug where an enemy will shoot at you endlessly regardless of range. I'm not entirely sure what causes this, but I suspect it has to do with enemies activated by stratagems, or a line of sight check going haywire. My best guess is that these enemies are initially put into combat while you're outside of their sight range, and as you never leave their visual range, because you were out of it to begin with, the flag that the enemy can see you is never switched off, and so they fire at you endlessly. That's my speculation as to why this can happen anyway, and there's no way this isn't a bug, because it stops if they get staggered, or if you enter and then leave their visual range. As for the guys who try to detect you in the middle of combat, I think this happens because these guys tunnel vision at walls or whatever so hard that they don't see their friends attacking people. They can't go into combat from sound alone, and so they have to see someone attacking, and they just happen to not. That's why these guys are typically from patrols that are coming past a line of sight blocker like a hill or a building.
I'm just showing you this flowchart bit so I can prove that I'm not just cherry picking evidence. Almost every second of this video is in this video that I'm doing.
Stealth in general is a mechanic that seems not half-baked because it definitely has full implementation, but at the very least it's terribly communicated.
It is not fully implemented, or at least isn't fully implemented yet. See the quote I did at the beginning of the video.
At the best of times, it's like playing Metal Gear Solid 5 with no HUD. No enemy detection indicators, no enemy marking, no easily understandable barks that communicate what the enemy are doing. I have played Metal Gear Solid 5 this way, and it is a lot of fun, but you are clearly intended to have the HUD, and playing without it is kind of aggravating.
Like how this game was not meant to be played solo or stealthy. You can't excuse this on another game and then not excuse it in the game you're making a guide on. I've played Metal Gear Solid 5 over and over and over again, and I never do it bum rushing with 100% kill rating, because it's just not meant to be for that. It's a stealth game, just like how Helldivers is a horde shooter, where you're supposed to shoot at hordes, not sneak around.
In Helldivers, that is the only option. The reason no one, as far as I can tell, has realized any of the things that I've mentioned yet is because it's all a little unintuitive as shit, and very hard to notice in normal gameplay due to the lack of any stealth aids like HUD.
Almost like you're playing the game not as intended.
Bots will hear the sound of their friends shooting, look at them doing it, and then alert, and from the player's perspective, that really does just seem like they alerted off of sound. The average person really doesn't need to know these things, but they're extremely vital for solo play.
Yes, the game based around chaotically shooting bugs has a system based around that and not stealth.
And fair warning, learning how to properly exploit these mechanics might push you into a playstyle most people would consider anti-fun, where you're avoiding combat rather than jumping into it at every opportunity, but that's their problem.
If you see me as one of these people, I think I've laid my arguments down wrong. Because if you want to play the game like this, that's perfectly fine. You bought the game, you can do whatever you want. But I draw the line at critiquing the game on something it's not meant for. You're interacting with the game systems in a way that the developer did not mean you to. So, why should they have 100% of the blame when you're not playing the game as intended?
But my real warning is that learning how to exploit these mechanics can kind of make the game extremely trivial, regardless of difficulty.
Ultimately, your goal is to do objectives and not kill bots. By yourself, missions that require you to sit in one place and kill a lot of people are comedically difficult, relative to missions that boil down to running around and throwing Lockheed Martin Pokeballs on things. Some mission types, like Exterminate, border on impossible by yourself.
I agree with you on this point. Why can't I throw an SOS before going into one of these missions so I don't have to go in raw? Although the game is designed off going by 4 players, so it's not really a fair critique under the way you're working with it. this is stupid, you definitely should be far more susceptible to being spotted, but still, they're stupid robots in a horde shooter.
But conveniently, they're also basically unlosable with other people. The most important thing that I can stress when you're on your own is the degree to which the enemy relies on you shooting to know where you are. Simply not shooting while retreating increases the likelihood that you'll lose your pursuers by an order of magnitude. Keeping your radar up at all times is a must, and playing with a nuclear radar upgrade, optionally combined with the radar enhancement boost, feels like playing a whole different game. It constantly pings enemies around you in a huge radius, and so you can always take engagements on your own terms. You'd be surprised how close you can get to patrols, even standing as long as you're parallel to them, so you have a lot more options for traversal than you might think. I seriously do want to hammer this home. I have so many clips of me running by patrols who don't notice me whatsoever because their detection cones are so narrow, and even if they do, you can press one button to instantly have the range you can be detected from. This is still true for unactivated patrols if you're running away from combat, as they won't notice their allies' gunfire at all. Avoiding patrols is a remarkably simple process thanks to the generosity of the detection rules. You can freely sprint around, and as soon as you hear a robot speak Polish, spam your prone button.
Like how you would fight going place to place, doing objectives. I feel like the villain in Zoolander right now.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
If your diver refuses to prone for no reason because the game sucks, dive and hope you don't ragdoll. Spamming dives actually makes you remarkably fast, especially in unfortunate weather conditions, and quite fittingly means you can even get into the loop of doing the old overpowered crouch dive loop from Metal Gear Solid 5, though it's not quite as fast as that game. Robots like to talk to themselves and each other all the time, so make sure you get into your head that this is the telltale detection sound that you have to look out for. If you do get detected, the best way out of detection is a little unintuitive. It may seem like running away is the best option, and it definitely can be if you have some major line of sight blockers to abuse like conveniently placed mountains, but a lot of the time you won't, and running will run directly into more enemies, which makes everything worse. If things are already like really bad, the best way to regain stealth in a nightmare situation is to stand still and fucking murder everything. Practice your Mecha Tenko Jutsu, use the overpowered autocannon, just commit a real Boston massacre until all alerted enemies are dead. If you put an enemy into combat, it's best to murder it most of the time.
I actively use this when I play the game, because I constantly find myself in a situation where I'm in the middle of nowhere, fighting over nothing with these enemies. So, I make it a constant point to constantly be moving from point to point. I think that's just how the game is supposed to be played, but it is a fair point that, yes, the things just do stop and do nothing. But most likely, you're not going to return to that place because I think you're supposed to run away from fights you can't win.
Not universally though, running away is valid. It's not hard to break visual contact, and when you do, enemies will run, and most of the time permanently plant their feet, at the last place you were seen or fired at an enemy. It's not hard to see this behavior either. These guys aren't going anywhere and can be ignored most of the time.
Yes, the robots are specialized, just like how the nursing spider, who is constantly surrounded by other bugs, or is in a nest, doesn't have the ability to call for help because they nurse bugs. And they're constantly with other bugs who can call for help.
You are required to commit murder at points because bots love standing on objectives and places of interest. Your target priority is equally unintuitive because you want to shoot the weakest enemies first. Any who look like normal-sized humanoids can call in dropships, and you do not want that. It's hard to overstate just how much easier objectives can be if you somehow stop them from getting a flare off. Most of the time, due to the layout of large bases, I think it's probably impossible without 4 people and a lot of communication. There's not really anywhere that you can sit that gives you sight of all enemies in most of these bases, and even if there was, good luck getting to it and then sniping all of the troopers in under 3 seconds. It is definitely possible to do with small groups that hang around places of interest, though, and you do not want them to fire off a flare.
Yes, I agree, detection is stupid sometimes.
Try to find a place to execute them all in one clean sweep with no enemies behind them so you don't have any accidental activations, and then you can deal with the Devastators and whatever else afterwards. You can take out groups one by one so long as you kill them at an angle where no one was behind them, which is quite silly.
Player exploits the AI of stupid robots. Stupid robots get exploited. Player is mad at robots for being stupid.
All of these rules apply on all mission types. You might assume like I did that enemies are just omniscient on defense missions, but no. The size of the map does of course make it impossible to play perfectly stealthy, but you can abuse the way enemies blind fire to get them to kill each other. In this clip I fire at the giant horde, and even though they're through a wall, it updates my last known position and thus where they're blind firing, which is really low down on the wall. And so the rocket devastators promptly kill everyone.
The game is assuming you're playing as intended. Is that kinda stupid? Yes. Is Cassius completely blameless? No, I don't think so.
With bots, there is some bullshit you're going to have to be aware of with gunships, striders, and mortars. On higher difficulties, they just blatantly cheat and know where you are the vast majority of the time. The standard detection rules don't apply for them, and when you're within a certain radius around a gunship spawner and or a mortar, it doesn't matter if you've yet to be detected. Fuck you.
That's probably bugged, because this game admittedly has a huge bug problem. Pun intended.
When you start objectives like most noticeably evac, it spawns a patrol 125 meters away which is oriented towards an outpost or map edge who walk towards you. When you call evac, there's a 50-50 chance that the enemies will get sudden ESP and know exactly where you are, no matter of how well hidden you are. I have no idea why this only happens sometimes.
This is completely fair. I hate factory striders. Fuck them.
After a factory strider wakes up, they seem to be able to know where you are indefinitely, which is really cool and awesome. They can also shove their head into terrain to shoot through it, which is extra cool and awesome. This is why I made a bug compilation.
If you didn't read that in time, that says, they are exceptionally blind, and walking away from them is an undefeatable strategy. The walking away strategy is very fair on how it's stupid or not, but the blind argument? Aren't the bugs blind? Like, I've never seen eyes on them, and the CEO says they smell things. Is that just me, or...?
Stealth is applicable to Terminids as well, though not one-to-one. You can absolutely bait them by shooting and you can avoid patrols, but it's hard to make out when they're detecting you because they like to gurgle by themselves a lot. And due to how many bugs are melee only, their missions are much easier in my experience, so I won't be covering them in detail.
It's not stealth armor. Scout is literally in the name. The only thing they criticize after this is how you can't stealth a defense mission, which I think you shouldn't be able to do anyway, since, like, they know you're there. They'll constantly be searching for you. Your whole point is to stop them from getting to where you are. Again, please don't send hate to this person. Personally, I enjoy their comedy, editing style, and just their content in general. I want to end the main section of this video with a very powerful statement by Arrowhead. A game for everyone is a game for no one. Also, a reminder to sub to the Patreon. At the end of every month, I will take all the money and put it on red or black in Patreon, depending on the patron's decision. And if you don't want to hear me shill the Patreon, get me a sponsor, loser. Goodbye, React Andes, and I will see you next time I grift.